Hi everyone, my name is Moni.
And I'm Naveen from Before You Play.
And today we're going to be showing you how to play a game that is currently on Kickstarter called Chesney.
This game is designed by Manuel Cheung and Yoyo Yeung and is published by YMC Studios, who are helping sponsor this video. And in this game, players are going to be taking on the roles of natives of a kingdom where the king just died and now there's a power vacuum to see who is going to rise to the top.
And so as residents of this kingdom, you are trying to align yourself with the winning faction who you think is going to be the next king. Now the game plays 5 to 10 players in about 70 to 110 minutes, and so today we're going to be showing you how to play it. But before we get started, we do have to mention that this is considered a prototype copy of the game, which means things are subject to change in the future.
Now if you are interested in this campaign, there will be a link in the description which you can check out at your leisure. And also if you like these kind of videos and you want to see more in the future, please consider subscribing.
And with that, we are ready to begin. So if you'd please direct your attention to the center of the table, we're all set up here for a 6-player game of Chesney.
Right.
Welcome to the kingdom of Katrolia.
Yes.
Now, like we were mentioning earlier, there is a dispute for the throne amongst these 4 factions. We have the Bearhead faction, the Foxtail, the Deer Antler, and the Dragon Wings.
Right.
And at the end of each round, your goal is to try to help get one of these 4 factions into majority power and to be a member of them. Now in this game, each player is given a player mat with their player color as well as 2 faction cards during setup. And these cards will determine which faction you are truly a part of. Now, in addition to the factions that they belong to, each faction card is going to be numbered between 1 through 9. Because we are playing a game with fewer than 7 players, then the numbers only range from 1 to 6. And this is important because it helps determine which faction you truly belong to. If your faction cards are from 2 different factions, then the faction that you belong to is going to be the one of the higher number. So in this case, I have a faction card for Dragon Wings as well as one for the Deer Antlers. But because my Dragon Wings card is of a higher value, then I actually belong to the Dragon Wings faction. And faction cards are always going to be placed face down at the start of the game, but you can look at them at any time.
Now, because both my cards belong to the Deer Antlers faction, I belong to that faction.
Right. So if they are matching faction cards, then it's just that one faction that you belong to. Now, some players may also have factions that have the exact same value but belong to 2 different factions. And in this case, you're considered a dual faction player, meaning you belong to both factions. Now, at the start of each round, faction cards are placed face down. But over the course of the round, you might be revealing other players' faction cards or maybe even your own. And so the one rule of thumb to keep in mind is that the orientation of the cards will always remain the same. Which means if you were to ever gain a new faction card or have to replace your own, if it's face up, then it stays face up, and if it's face down, then it stays face down. Now, in addition to your 2 faction cards, each player also has their own secret character card. And these character cards will give you a special ability once you choose to reveal them at the start of your turn, but until then, they're placed face down.
Right.
Now, the way that a round works is players are going to be taking turns playing up to 2 action cards from their hand. We each start the game with 3 action cards in hand, and these action cards are going to be of 2 main types. You'll have general cards, which will do things like manipulate your cards in hand, switch out players' faction cards, revealing faction cards, and just otherwise manipulating the status of the game on the table. And you'll also have red attack cards, which will allow you to attack other players, hopefully wounding them.
Right.
But on your turn, you're only allowed to play 1 card of each type. Now, there are a total of 27 unique types of action cards in the deck. We're not going to be able to go through each and every one of them, but we'll talk about the different categories that they come in. Now, amongst the green general cards, there are 6 main types. The first one being intelligence cards. Intelligence cards allow you to reveal or check faction cards from other players. For example, the emissary allows you to choose a faction card from a player and look at it. So this is going to give you information as to what factions are around the table. Hand control cards allow you to do things such as drawing additional action cards or forcing another player to discard their entire hand. Next, we have faction swap cards that allow you to change factions with another player.
Then we have heal cards, which allow players to recover health points and also can be very useful when a player gets wounded, which we'll talk about later. Next, we have preserve cards that help protect against other players. For example, you place trap cards in front of an opponent's player mat, preventing them from activating their character skill until the end of their next turn. And finally, we have flash cards which can be played on other players' turns if specific conditions are met. For example, we have this belief card which can be useful. You play this card before you roll a die, and then you get to add 9 extra points to that die roll. Then you get to draw a card.
Now, in addition to those 6 different types of general cards, we also have 2 types of red attack cards. We have the single sword attack cards, which let you deal damage to a single player, and we have double sword attack cards, which let you deal damage to multiple players.
And some cards require you to roll a die, such as when playing the duel card. This card requires both players to roll the die and suffer damage according to their die values.
Now, each time you deal damage to a player, that player is going to lose one of their 3 starting HP. And anytime they lose all 3 of their HP, they become wounded. Now, wounded players are not out of the game. They can still score points at the end of the round as long as they are part of the winning faction. But otherwise, wounded players can no longer attack or use their character cards. In fact, when you become wounded, you must discard your entire hand and you can no longer hold cards at the end of your turn. On your turn as a wounded player, you're required to draw a card from the deck and then either play it if you're allowed to, or give it to another player or discard it. And at the end of your turn, of course, you cannot have any cards in hand. Now, anytime a player becomes wounded, you're going to execute what's called a faction judgment. And this is basically when you check the status of the game state to see whether or not the round is going to end. Now, when executing a faction judgment, all non-wounded players are going to reveal which faction they belong to the non-wounded player. They're going to do this by taking their faction token into their hand, closing their eyes, and secretly revealing it to only the non-wounded player. All other players who have been previously wounded also are not allowed to see this. If at this point all non-wounded players belong to at least one of the same faction, then the round will end. And that includes dual faction players. So for example, if this player was not wounded and they belong to both of these factions, because one of the factions they belong to is also the foxtail, then the round will end since there is at least one faction that all players belong to, which in this case is the foxtail faction. And at that point, then you would go into end of round scoring. But before we talk about scoring, I just want to mention that on your turn, you can actually choose to optionally declare a faction judgment. This happens after you play your action cards, and if you are incorrect, meaning there are at least 2 factions around the table, then you basically declare defeat and you yourself become wounded. Also, we didn't discuss the character cards too much, but on your turn before playing those action cards, you can choose to optionally reveal your character card to use its ability. Character cards have 3 main types of skills. There are active skills that basically resolve immediately when revealing the character card. There are passive skills that are just ongoing as soon as you reveal it. And there are special skills, which basically come into play when the specific condition on the card is met. And you end your turn by drawing cards equal to the number of cards you played. And as soon as the last action card from the deck is drawn, an event card is revealed and resolved immediately. Now, once the round ends, you go into end of round scoring, and all players who are part of the winning faction earn 3 points, and that includes any wounded players.
Now, if you won as a dual faction, you're only going to score 2 points because you had a little bit of an advantage compared to everybody else.
Although, if the round ends and all players are wounded, or the only non-wounded players are part of dual factions, then nobody scores those points. And if you are the player who caused the last faction judgment, then you score an additional point. At this point, if you are playing the advanced game, you can also score additional points for completing honor missions. Afterwards, you set up for the next round. And at the end of 3 rounds, the players who scored the most cumulative points are going to be the winners.
Alternatively, players can play up until one player reaches 12 points, and at that point, whoever has the most points wins.
And that's essentially how you play Chesney. Now, if you have any questions about anything that you saw here today, please feel free to leave us a comment down below, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible.
Now, this game is currently on Kickstarter, so if you are interested in the campaign, there will be a link down below, which you can check out at your own leisure. Like Monique said, if you do have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. And if you like these kind of videos and you want to see more in the future, please consider subscribing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.